Okay, I'll give it one more minute and then we can get started, unless you all think that the folks who are likely to join are already here, and then we can go too. Is it worth waiting a little bit longer?
2 minutes.
Great.
Yeah. Okay. So I have my tickets for Maryland for October.
Can you all hear me?
Yes.
Okay, I cannot figure out, my camera is plugged in, but I don't understand why the system is not finding it. Let me.
We're seeing your book, just not you.
I could not be seen on video with the
There
link.
we go.
Oh, there you go. Okay.
Great. Well, maybe I'll go ahead and get started if that feels okay for everyone. So hi everyone. I'm Rahul Young, better known as John's son and favorite child. Remember that when my sister does a presentation down the road too.
Hey, Rahul,
Yes.
you may be the favorite, but you're not the prettiest.
That we can all agree with for sure. That is definitely the truth. So excited to get to have time with you all today, and apologies for those who tried to join last week with our technical difficulties, but I appreciate everyone persevering and excited to get to talk today. I work for an organization called Rewiring America, which I'll be telling you about, which is a nonprofit focusing on residential electrification. So with that, I guess I'll just say, I'll share my screen in a second to kind of walk you through the deck that I have. My plan was to speak for around 20 minutes and then really have a discussion with any questions, thoughts, contributions you have. So I would say as questions come up, feel free to drop questions in the chat or just hold them and then we can talk through them at the end, but definitely want to make sure that this is as interactive as possible. Yeah, I think that's it. And yeah, so like I said, I'm going to try to talk for 20 minutes, but leave most of the time for Q&A. So with that, let me go ahead and share the screen. Okay, looks like everybody's seeing that. So I think we're good to go. So again, Rahul at Rewiring America. And usually before I make you listen to me for too long, I like to start off with a video from one of our co-workers, Saul Griffith. So I'm going to start with that for about 3 minutes, and then I'll dive into the rest of the presentation.
Sadly, people have the impression that we can't fix climate and still have the American dream. That's not true. The reality is we only need half as much energy as we think, and we don't have to shrink our cars, we don't have to shrink our homes to achieve that. Right now you think that sounds too good to be true, but here's how you make it true. We need to electrify nearly everything. In 2018, I worked with the Department of Energy to map the entire US energy system, where energy comes from and where it goes. Everything from how much energy your toaster uses to how much energy it takes to make steel. It is really amazing just how much energy is wasted. The wasted energy we're talking about isn't really the wasted energy of forgetting to turn your kitchen light off. It's in the way we make and produce energy. More than 60% of the fuels that we use to generate our electricity get wasted as heat. More than 80% of the energy we stick into our cars in the form of gasoline or diesel is also wasted. If we electrify everything, we eliminate a huge amount of the waste. We don't need to shrink our cars, we don't need to turn the thermostat down, and we use less than half of the energy we currently do. We've got to electrify our trucks and our cars. We've got to electrify our homes, our furnaces, our hot water heaters, even the way we cook. And then we need to supply that electricity with our clean, non-wasteful sources, with wind, with solar, with hydro, and with other clean energy systems. And if we did that, we're going to save every business and every home money. Wind and solar are the cheapest forms of electricity going onto the grid today. Solar on your roof can be the cheapest energy source that we have ever had. If we use all of this cheap energy, there's an opportunity here for us all to save money while improving our energy systems. Think about that for a second. The future can be awesome. We can have cleaner water, we can have cleaner air, we can have cleaner skies and a better environment. And we can save thousands of dollars per year in every household. Why do I know America can do this? It's because America, uniquely in the world, has a history of taking on audacious projects, solving the Great Depression, fighting World War II and winning it for the Allies, launching man into outer space. If America goes bold and big in that manner, and we do it focused on electrification of the economy, we can be the first country in the world to truly address climate change at scale and on the time frame we need. America is blessed with incredible resources and can easily run on clean and renewable electricity. America can be electric. Our future can be electric. Let's rewire America.
Okay. A little bit more about Rewiring America. So we are a nonprofit founded in 2020, but back in 2021, there were really only 3 full-time staff who were focusing on trying to get the Inflation Reduction Act passed. And now we're at 130 folks. I think when I joined November 2022, there were 30 people, and again, we're at 130. So by nonprofit standards, that's kind of radical growth. And I think it's really a sign about how much momentum and resources there are currently in the world of climate and electrification specifically. And I think a big part of our work is to try to bring expertise both for within the climate world. I've spent my entire career in aspects of working on climate change, but also bringing expertise from outside of it. So bringing folks with communications and marketing perspectives or digital products perspectives from outside of the climate world to try to figure out what are the things that we can learn from other work that can help inform how to communicate to folks about climate and electrification in new ways that will reach wider audiences as well. So as you heard in the video, I mean, our theory of change, our mission really is around the idea of having people focus on abundance, that we do have, thanks to the great decrease in costs of renewable energy, we really have enough. We can get out of the paradigm of feeling like people always have to sacrifice if they want to do the right thing for the world, that there are ways to kind of make sure that we really are providing for people, improving the quality of their life, providing for their families, while also doing the right thing for the environment as well. And honestly, I mean, I think this has been my own journey. I mean, I was born in the 70s, obviously was raised in a time in kind of the birth of kind of the modern environmental movement, and was raised in it and still believe deeply in a lot of the tenets of it. But it really was, you know, in a time where sacrifice and kind of conservation was the primary message. And there's a lot of value in that, and that was exactly the right message for the time. But I think it also, you know, led to a lot of great things. It led to the creation of the Energy Star program, talking about the miles per gallon labels on car, focusing on energy efficiency, all things that were really important at the time, given what the various technological options were. But I think we are at a new time, and I think that has really affected how our organization tries to affect the environmental movement going forward. So as you heard in the video that I showed, this came out of work that Saul and colleagues of his did for the Department of Energy to really map all of the emissions in the United States and where they came from. And basically what they found was 87% of our national emissions come from energy in one way or the other, the remaining blocks being in a couple places related to soil agriculture, livestock, and refrigerants. The great thing about it is that when 87% is coming from energy, that if you can affect these two things, you can actually fundamentally change the nature of carbon emissions in our country. And that really talks about changing supply and changing demand. So supply is talking about where does our electricity come from? How can we move people to electricity? And then from the demand side, how can we make sure that the things that people use using energy can be electrified so they can take advantage of those developments in clean electricity? So one of the great success stories in the climate world over the last 10 to 15 years has been how much progress we've made on the supply side of those things. So as I'm sure many of you are aware, there's been massive progress in terms of the price of solar and wind, particularly, along with other renewable resources dropping. And so the pace of development of those shares has been radical and kind of beyond the projections of even some of the most I think rose-colored glasses folks amongst us to see how quickly the price of solar has dropped, and therefore how quickly installations are increasing around the country. We still need to get them to go faster in lots of different ways, and happy to talk about that. But it has been a source of hope for us that it's gotten as good as it has. But we need to change the demand part of that too, and the way to do that is to tap into folks like yourselves to try to figure out, okay, I'm concerned about the climate, but I'm trying to figure out what is the right thing to do. What's the right thing that I should be prioritizing in my own life to make a difference here? And so, in addition to working at the political level, electing the people who can kind of change the policies that make all these things possible, when it comes to actual personal action, we really are hoping that people can focus around the 42% of energy-related emissions that basically come from the decisions that we all make around the kitchen table. And that really breaks down into these 5 categories. How do we get around, whether they be cars, bikes, public transit? How do we heat our buildings and water? How do we cook our food? How do we dry our clothes? And where does our electricity come from? We have the ability to actually control all of these things. So thinking through kind of the technologies that are relevant to these things, a lot of our work at Rewiring America is focused on heat pump adoption, the most efficient way of heating your home, and to do that via electricity as well, as instead of burning fossil fuels. I suspect a lot of you already know about heat pumps, but happy to talk more about it. But important to know that it's 3 times more efficient than your average kind of fossil fuel or electric furnace, and especially relevant for folks in the Bay Area like me. I'm in San Francisco. It has the ability to heat and cool your home. So for folks who have not had air conditioning, but now live in a world where that's increasingly important for your home, it's an ability to upgrade a technology that is helping to increase the efficiency of the technology in your homes, and also potentially provide additional comfort in your home that you might not have had before. Another technology is a heat pump water heater. So 3 times more efficient than a fossil fuel water heater. It still gives you the ability to have the warm showers that I think most of us love to have on a regular basis. Induction stoves, so things that can help save energy, but also to be able to take a gas stove that that can contribute to reduced indoor air quality in your house, and replace it with a highly efficient stove that is incredibly responsive, actually easier to cook with in certain ways, certainly much easier to clean while improving the health within your home. Heat pump dryers are relatively new technology that can be part of helping to making sure that you dry your clothes in the most efficient way as well, outside of line drying them, which is also always a great idea for folks when they have the right type of home and yard for that as well. Then thinking about where your electricity comes from, where possible, taking advantage of solar photovoltaic energy, whether it be on your rooftop or via community solar, or through be able to kind of choose the different sources of your electricity through a utility or through different community choice aggregation, but helping to ensure that the electricity coming into your home is as clean as possible. And then, of course, thinking through electric transportation as well. So that could be for electric vehicles for folks who have cars, along with the chargers required in your home for them. In my home, we have an electric cargo bike. That's how I get my kids around the city and most of the time as well. And then, of course, trying to choose mass transit options whenever possible. A few of the things to mention in terms of technologies relevant in the home. So weatherization. So while you're thinking about installing new technologies to replace a gas furnace or your old water heater, also thinking through what are the other things that you can do to improve your home to make sure that those technologies, especially the heat pump, works as efficiently as possible. So things like, air sealing, having the right windows, making sure that you don't have kind of too much of a leaky house, and that you really just have kind of a nice energy efficient house so that when you warm or cool it, you're really getting to kind of keep that warmth or cooling in your home as you would want to make it as comfortable as possible. And then also recognizing that with some of these technologies, because there's, you'll be talking about, switching in some cases from a gas furnace to a heat pump or a gas stove to induction stove, that will sometimes lead to kind of needing to make some changes to wiring within your house, the electric panel in your house as well. And so just being thoughtful about how to do that. And I'll be talking a little bit about resources and tools we have that can help you think through the sequence of these events. So when we add up all the different things that we think need to change in America across these different technologies, we think that on the order of 1 billion machines needed to be changed to electrify across all of our 121 million households to achieve the climate goals that we want to as a country. So this is a massive undertaking that we have to have kind of the ambition and vision to meet somehow. When we run the numbers, and this is a national number, this will really vary greatly, state to state, household to household, but there's the potential to really have significant savings in your home when you electrify. And that's particularly true with transportation for folks who switch from, a gas-powered car to an electric car. But there are certainly savings available for the other technologies we're talking about as well. And that's in terms of the ongoing savings. We'll talk a little bit later about some of the first cost savings through the Inflation Reduction Act that you can take advantage of. And our goal, if we are able to do this at the scale we're talking about the largest possible wealth transfer from centralized monopolistic energy producers to distributed energy producers and to consumers that has ever occurred in history. This is really the democratization of energy and climate in our country. And it leads to a vision of shared abundance where, again, people feel like they are doing the right thing for the environment, but fundamentally improving the quality of their life at the same time. So our mission as an organization is to say within the decade, we have to change the market default so that the efficient electric machine is the most affordable and convenient to purchase and install for everyone. So that for folks who actually don't particularly prioritize the climate, they may not know anything about these technologies. If something breaks in their home, they make a call to a local contractor, that we can feel confident that the solution that they're going to propose, that a contractor is going to propose to them, is actually the most efficient electrified solution for them, even if in the past they might have recommended a gas furnace or a gas water heater. There also is an important equity consideration with electrification. So much of current kind of air pollution and climate change disproportionately affects low-income communities and communities of color around the country. That kind of comes to the air quality of communities who are located next to kind of a gas or a coal power plant. Let's talk about air quality related to kind of transportation emissions in different neighborhoods across the country and within people's homes as well. So when we talk about electrification, we're talking about actually reducing air quality and other health other health impacts that are currently accruing more to kind of communities of color around the country. So when we're talking about electrification, we want to benefit everyone, but we want to provide particular additional benefits to the communities that have been harmed the most by fossil fuel production over the last century. This is a little bit of a breakdown of kind of the potential savings and considerations for the different technologies we talked about. So again, this will vary greatly. We have tools that I'll be connecting you to so you can learn more about how this can apply to your house specifically. But this gives you a little bit of a sense of kind of what the potential savings from a dollar perspective can be for each of the technologies, what the particular emission reductions can be from a carbon perspective, and then again, other benefits there, because we want to make sure that we really are highlighting all the other benefits. So for somebody who's not particularly motivated by reducing their carbon footprint or not particularly motivated by reducing their bills, can also see the other benefits to their comfort and health with some of these technological changes. This is a list that I'm happy to provide this deck to everybody ahead of time, but again, we'll be showing you tools that'll help connect you to these things. There's a whole list of different tax credits that are already available through the Inflation Reduction Act that can help lower the costs of these technologies if you want to install them in your homes. So a couple different examples here related to heat pumps, where you can see up to a 30% reduction per year for each new technology you create. There's additional things around kind of electric cars, whether they be new or used. And then coming in 2025 in different a different schedule by state, there are actual rebates coming online as well that are significantly more generous for folks, but those are targeted more for low and moderate income folks. So folks up to what we could call 120% of area moderate income. That should make this easier and easier for them to do. So to try to get kind of the equity considerations for electrification, to make it as easy and kind of hopefully zero cost as possible for lower and moderate income households to electrify as well. In terms of Rewiring America's approach, so we have a few different areas. So, I mean, again, we started as a policy shop that worked to get the Inflation Reduction Act passed. We continue to work at the advocacy level at Congress, as well as at the local government level, to truly make sure that we continue to fund these efforts, continue to expand them, and continue to make them as equitable as possible. We also work extensively in the private sector with both kind of small scale entrepreneurs in the electrification world, as well as large scale utilities, heat pump manufacturers, et cetera, to try to figure out what are kind of market-based solutions that we can work to accelerate electrification. We provide a bunch of digital resources and written tools for consumers. And then the part of Rewiring America that I lead is our Rewiring Communities project. This is where we do deep implementation work for low and moderate income communities around the country to really actually implement electrification projects in low-income homes in different communities and really show kind of what are the barriers to doing that, how do we help overcome them, and how do we over time figure out a way to scale that to get from kind of to the hundreds and thousands and tens of thousands and ultimately millions of households being electrified. So wanted to talk through a few different tools that we have available that I hope that you'll kind of take advantage of as you go deeper into these issues. So one is something that we launched a couple months ago called the Local Pace of Progress. And again, I'll send this out to everyone, but you can go to pop.rewiringamerica.org. This is a tool where you can really look at, in each community around the country, down to the kind of county and city level, what is the current pace of progress based on local and state policies around heat pump adoption, other electrification technologies? How is that tracking towards climate goals, and what is the gap that exists, and what needs to change in each community to be able to do this? This is something that we connect local policymakers to, so that if you have a city council person who's trying to pass legislation, they can get data to help support why they're trying to kind of pass a new local incentive program or new building code changes. But it's also something that community activists can use to help lobby their local elected representatives to make these kinds of policies more of a priority for their communities. The website here that can be kind of most directly beneficial for you and your home is the website I'm looking here. This is homes.rewiringamerica.org. So this is our consumer-facing website, and this is where you go to kind of get all the detailed information to say, like, I don't even know what a heat pump does. How does it work? What kind of products should I be looking at? If I call a contractor, what are the questions I need to ask? This will take you through all of those things for each of the different technologies that we've talked about. In addition, when you go to homes.rewiringamerica.org and click in the right corner in that purple button that says Make a Plan, that'll take you to two things, both our calculator. This is something that we launched when the Inflation Reduction Act was passed to help people understand what are the specific tax credits and rebates that might be applicable to me based on the characteristics of my house, where I live, et cetera. So you can go there, click on the calculator, and put in a little bit of information about your home and immediately get kind of a line-by-line description of what tax credits and rebates you'll be able to take advantage of. And this will become state-specific for folks around the country over the next year as well. And in addition, it'll take you to our personal electrification planning tool. So that is something that you can, again, put a little bit more information about your home. It'll ask you some priorities about kind of what are you trying to really prioritize? Is it around carbon reduction or reducing your energy bills or improving the health in your home? And it'll give you a step-by-step sense of what your electrification plan could look like, when it's the right time to start calling an electrician, calling different contractors, what the likely life of your existing equipment is, and how to start planning in advance before something breaks to be able to change it. And so this can really be a personalized plan. So really encourage each of you to go to homes.rewiringamerica.org, click on the Make a Plan button, and do this for your home. It's all free. This is really just meant to be informational, y'all, but it's to try to make this kind of an actionable set of things that you can do for your home. So I hope that you'll try it out yourselves, and if you like it, spread the word to your friends and families and neighbors too. And as I mentioned, we've been doing this kind of where we're providing information on different federal resources. We've been able to launch in 13 states so far, so that when you want to learn about the incentives, it can give you all the details about each of the different incentives available to you from your local utility, from the state. And then later this year, it should be available for all 50 states as well. A couple last things to mention, near and dear to my heart. So one of the things that I did soon after I started at Rewiring America almost 2 years ago was start our Local Government Leaders for Electrification Coalition. This is a coalition of over 200 mayors and local legislators around the country. And it's our way to really say, the Inflation Reduction Act exists, but change happens at the local level. So for folks who are trying to do this at the local level, we want you to know that you're not alone. We want you to get connected to other like-minded folks so that you can share best practices, learn what's worked in other communities that might feel similar to you. How do you leverage that and start to improve that so we can really make the case that this is something that's happening at the federal level, but also happening at the state level and the local level in a wide diversity of communities around the country. And then the last thing I'll mention that we were really excited about, we have the ambitious goal to try to change 1 billion machines in this country. That requires a lot of resources to do that. So another component of the Inflation Reduction Act is what's called the Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund. And this is a significant amount of money that EPA is devoted to helping to provide financing tools to help accelerate carbon reduction throughout the country. So a few months ago, we put together a coalition with these other organizations you see here. Habitat for Humanity and United Way, who you've probably heard of, and then Liskin Enterprise, who are the 2 largest multifamily affordable housing developers in the country. We created the Power Forward Communities Coalition, and were awarded $2 billion by EPA to work on residential electrification. So we've just kind of signed in the last couple of weeks the details with EPA on this, and now are going to be working over the next 7 years to deploy $2 billion in predominantly low-income and disadvantaged communities around the country to help accelerate the adoption of the home electrification technologies that we talked about. And as the first step of all these things, back right around Christmas of last year, we were doing a project in DeSoto, Georgia, which is a small community about 3 hours south of Atlanta. It's a place that really feels kind of left behind by the modern world in a lot of ways. And we went to talk to residents there, partly through kind of introductions by Stacey Abrams, who's our senior counsel at Rewiring America, former gubernatorial candidate of Georgia. And she said, this is a community that's an example of we need to change. So it's a community of 85 households that we are working to electrify the entire town. We're going to be done with that project in about 3 months. But the first installation we got to do was for Miss Carter in her home in DeSoto. She'd been living without any kind of hot water for about 9 months. Her previous gas-powered water heater had died, and she didn't have the funds to be able to replace it. We were able to provide funds to do it. Had a contractor who came out to DeSoto, made that change. She now has hot water coming from the most efficient technology that exists, and it's been transformative for her comfort and life and well-being, while also doing the right thing for the environment as well. So, it's 1 billion machines. This is our first one. Only 999 million and change to go to achieve our goal. So with that, I will stop sharing and come back to the screen so I can see everybody, and very excited to take questions and love to hear what questions and thoughts you have. Steve, I think you're first.
Yes. First of all, the word billion is terrifying.
Yep.
People go, oh my God, maybe 1 million, but 1 billion. The issue I have is that in the United States, probably 38% of households are renting.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm. In the Bay Area, that's 45%,
Yep.
and in San Francisco, it's 65%.
Yep.
So I'll give you a real life example. My building, it's 4 apartments, and there are 2 buildings contiguous with 4 apartments, and it's the same owner. I mean, their dad built the thing, and they grew up in this building. And 5 of the 8 apartments have gas heaters.
Yep.
This past winter, my gas heater, the pilot light started going out.
Yep.
And that meant I had to drag this little space heater around the apartment. Otherwise, it was 50 degrees when I woke up in the morning. And the management company contacted a company to come out and take a look at the heater. And they said, can't do a thing. California just passed a law. And it's my understanding that the law about replacing gas heaters does not go into effect until 2025. But the one little part that would fix my heater, absolutely no company will send anything even obliquely related to gas heaters into the state of California. So, I mean, I suggested we'll send somebody in a pickup truck to Nevada to get it. And they absolutely will not sell anything like that. So they had people come out and take a look, and they talked about the heater pump. My building fronts the sidewalk all the way around.
Mm-hmm.
There is no place that the heat pump could go. And if they put it on the roof, they need a crane to bring it here, and it would collapse the roof. And I happen to live on the top floor. So there are a lot of us who are in the position right now that I don't know what's going to happen, because I know the owner. She lives in Spain. And if I manage to outlive her, her brother is going to sell this building, and then I'll end up getting kicked out. So there has to be some way that this whole project can work with the government to be able to find workarounds. That's what we used to do at the state bar. To find a workaround. If that doesn't work, you do something else. So I'm curious how everything that I hear you talking about is really being directed towards homeowners.
Mm-hmm.
But where does that leave us renters in this calculation? And number two, if you could be kind enough to send us all an email with links to everything, and because I'd really like to put that video that you started with onto our Facebook page, IARF Facebook page, to let people know what's going on. And thank you for your response.
No, for sure. Thanks so much for your really thoughtful comment. And to the very last point, yes, 100%. I will send you kind of the deck and links in various forms so that you can kind of share them as you see fit, and happy to do that. And obviously, if there's anything else that I can do to help, give you additional information, please don't hesitate to reach out. To your larger question, there are a couple different parts of that. I mean, number one, I do just want to acknowledge that this is obviously much more complicated for a tenant than it is for a homeowner, and that is real. And so I will talk about some potential parts of the solution, but it is complicated, and I just want to be honest about that. So number one, I'll mention, if you go to homes.rewiringamerica.org, there is a specific for tenants section that I think you can take a look at and get some additional resources to. And I think it will not solve all the problems you're talking about, but it does start to get at some of the questions, including what are the things a tenant can do if their landlord is not particularly cooperative? And again, it's not the same array of things, but it is things like, thinking about an induction hot plate or kind of a room-based heat pump and things like that. There are certain things that tenants have some amount of control over, but again, recognizing that, we're looking for systemic change, and to do that in tenant landlord situations, landlords do need to be kind of cooperative with that too. And so there is kind of a sense of things of if you're interested in engaging with your landlord, here's a list of questions, here's how to frame it them, here's some guidance for how to do that. Again, that will work in some scenarios. There's going to be landlords who are not particularly engaged or not feeling incentivized to do that, or like you were talking about, Steve, where it feels like there's some other kind of building space constraints, et cetera, that they're I'd like to do the right thing, but it's actually very complicated to do it without triggering a lot of other rehab parts of this too. I guess to your very specific kind of challenge, I mean, one, obviously we care deeply about electrification, but I don't want that to lead to your roof caving in or you not being able to have heat in any way. That is not the world of abundance that is dedicated to our mission, just to be clear. That is an unreasonable sacrifice to make. I'm not aware of the specific California law you're talking about. It is true that in the Bay Area Air Quality Management District has passed a couple kind of air-related regulations, but they are basically saying that by 2027, if your gas water heater breaks, it will have to be replaced by an electric water heater. And by 2029, if your gas furnace breaks, then it will need to be replaced by a heat pump. So there are things like that coming for the Bay Area, but with a slightly longer timeline. And because of the potential challenges that you already mentioned, there are a bunch of working groups. So I'm part of one that's kind of a combination of SPUR, which is an organization based in San Francisco, along with the Bay Area Air Quality Management District, a couple of the utilities, et cetera, to kind of think through like what are the implementation challenges that will make that difficult, and how do we plan for kind of a just transition? Because we all want to get to the long-term transition here, but if that leads to people, something breaking in their home and them not being able to fix it, that is not a good outcome. That's not going to create kind of a rallying around like this new policy that we're trying to create. Like, people sometimes just need their problem solved, and they may not have the ability or resources to be able to solve it in our idealized way. So, I mean, the problem I hadn't heard of that specifically, Steve, of like literally not being able to get a part, and I'm surprised to hear that, since it feels like we're still a few years away from that. But I'm happy to dig more into that and talk a little bit more with my California context to understand what that's about. But I think the general principle is, we're doing our best to establish these goals, because you're right, 1 billion is an overwhelming number, but we need the policies in place to kind of make that transition happen, while working on kind of the individual steps to make that implementation as smooth as possible, and kind of handhold the various manufacturers of the technologies to help them see, this is where your business is going to be going. How do you make sure that you have the pieces in place to help people replace their things at the right time? But that shouldn't lead to like the supply chain breaking so that you can't fix a furnace in the short term too. So sorry not to be able to solve that particular problem, but just know that as an organization, I think we're focusing on the ambitious goals, but see the need to make sure that it is done incrementally, so that we don't kind of polarize people against the long-term vision because we're not solving their short-term needs. Are there other thoughts or questions for folks that would be helpful to talk through? Betsy.
Yes, well, I'm involved in an organization that is fighting against, among other things, but pretty focused on no new fossil fuel infrastructure.
Mm-hmm.
And do you think that will all just dry up by itself? I mean, right now it gets all kinds of subsidies from the government, which is ridiculous for stuff that's, without too much exaggeration, is killing us.
Yep.
But anyway, so we're putting a lot of pressure on large banks not to invest in fossil fuels, on insurance companies not to insure new fossil fuel construction, and then in more conventional ways, petitioning the government not to approve new. Anyway, that you got that picture. So how are we kind of wasting our time? Because if all of what you're doing succeeds, it will just blow up and dry up and blow away, or
well, first of all, thank you so much for the work that you're doing. I think that's incredibly important. And to answer your question, no, absolutely not. It's incredibly useful. All of these things have to happen all at the same time for this to work, right? So I think it all intersects, right? Like, obviously one of our main focuses is to drive demand for these technologies, to send the signal to both the private sector, the manufacturers of these things, but to utilities, to policymakers, et cetera, to say, this is what the people want. This is going to make their lives better. You need to kind of pass the policies and the rates and such to be able to enable these things to happen. But creating the demand helps move the politics too. So I think it's one entry point, but another entry point is the one that you're talking about, is to kind of really force people to kind of make those hard decisions as soon as they can, and to understand that there's public pressure against building of any new fossil fuel infrastructure. So I think that is also very important. A few of the things I would talk about that would kind of intersect with those things. So like I mentioned, we do have a policy shop continuing to kind of work kind of at the advocacy level, but also in kind of the nitty gritty of the regulations that contribute to these things. So for example, it's a less sexy, less talked about part of the ecosystem, but public utility commissions have a tremendous amount of power in each state around the setting of gas rates, electricity rates, et cetera. They're kind of they're a more anonymous agency that doesn't get as much attention as they deserve, and as a result, they kind of have way more power than they should. And so a big part of our work is actually working to kind of change who's appointed to this public utility commissions, that they kind of come with a greater understanding of what needs to change there. So I think that's a real important part of the advocacy landscape, and would for sure encourage you, as you're thinking about that, to kind of think through, how to influence those kinds of agencies, because that, if you do that, you can start to change the relative price of gas and electricity, and that helps make electricity even a more kind of clear, good financial decision to make. In addition, one of the things we see in California, for example, is that, talking with PG&E, I mean, they have complicated incentives, but there are aspects of their gas infrastructure that are deteriorating. And when they look at the costs to kind of replace and change all those things, it's actually cheaper for them in certain parts of the community to actually just kind of incentivize everybody to switch to electricity in general and kind of kill their gas connections once and for all, and not do that. So, I mean, so they work with us to kind of help target particular kind of neighborhoods, towns, communities where it's like, where their numbers are telling them like, it's actually a bad investment for them to rebuild gas infrastructure because it's actually cheaper to electrify. That's still different between them kind of being fully on board with electrifying everything. Again, they have kind of weird incentives from the California Public Utility Commission about whether it's really good for them to see more people switch to electricity, but they're trying to make progress on these things. The last thing I'll say about it is that this is, again, where equity becomes really important, because there's a thing that can be called like the gas death spiral that happens, where if it's only kind of the wealthier and more privileged folks who electrify, then, so like if you electrify your home tomorrow and then suddenly you're like, great, I get to like, close my gas meter entirely, I'll never use it again, and therefore I don't have to charge, pay my like monthly surcharge for kind of gas connections. That's great for you individually. That's great, as a way to kind of send a signal. But if it turns out that it's only the more privileged folks to do that, then basically utilities have to spread the cost of their gas infrastructure around the remaining folks who are still on the gas system. And so that tends to then be kind of over time, more and more kind of like, less wealthy people, more disadvantaged folks, then they could actually see their bills start to go up as a result. That's not the transition that we want. That's not fair either. So I think that's why it's really important that we, again, motivate the folks who are like motivated by the climate, want to do the right thing, can afford to do the right thing, even if it costs a little bit more, even with all the incentives. That's a great thing for us to do, but it has to be kind of paired with folks who don't have those same resources, but we can make sure they take advantage of these other incentives that are there to kind of make for kind of lower, no cost changes, so that they're also exiting the gas system and not seeing the cost disproportionately accrue to them. So I know that was a long monologue and kind of a complicated answer, but it gets at kind of all the ways these things wind together. So back to your original question, we have to work it at each of these levels. It has to be kind of in a demand generation, a communications kind of in like media landscape level, digital products and tools and resources, activism as you're describing, and policy. All of these things have to happen all at the same time, and they all feed into one another for the change to happen at the scale that we want to. So please keep doing what you're doing. I think it's incredibly valuable.
Thank you. I have to just note, I made a little note to myself. The PUCs have too much power.
Yeah.
And that made me chuckle.
Yeah. Yeah. Power in all the senses of the word. Right? Steve, go ahead.
Yeah. Am I okay? Yeah, my mic is on. Is your organization working at any level of government?
We're at all levels of government, for sure. Okay. So so I mean, again, we started a place where we actually were kind of actively lobbying members of Congress to pass the Inflation Reduction Act back in 2021. So I mean, that's where we started as an organization. So we continue to kind of work actively with EPA and the Department of Energy around the implementation of various aspects of the Inflation Reduction Act. But we're also working at kind of many states throughout the country to kind of pass these things at the state and local level as well. So just as one example, Colorado is a place where we kind of did a ribbon cutting a couple weeks ago to celebrate the second anniversary of the Inflation Reduction Act and celebrate kind of some homeowners who had kind of just bought a new house and are having a baby and bought a heat pump to create kind of the most comfortable and efficient place for their kid to grow up in, and had a ribbon cutting, and the governor of Colorado, Jared Polis, came out for the ribbon cutting, with 20 folks to celebrate heat pumps, and he's been kind of a huge advocate for us. And that's been that, so we're doing that at the state level as well. And as I mentioned, kind of with our local government leaders coalition, a big part of my job is working to support mayors, city council people, et cetera, to pass local policies and incentives and communication campaigns wherever possible. So working at government level is fundamental to our work, but we want to try to make sure we're doing that while also working kind of with the private sector, with kind of big, media companies, the Netflixes and Disneys of the world, to make sure that every single piece of programming they have from now on has an induction stove in it instead of a gas stove. So we're trying to do it at all these different levels, recognizing like policy, government's important, but we also need to socialize these ideas and get the private sector to kind of accelerate at the same time too. John.
Yeah, about 10 years ago, I put in geothermal and solar panels. But the solar panels nowadays are about 3 times at least more efficient than the panels I got then. And I'm far from supplying all my electrical needs with the solar power I've got. But I'm loath to put out the money without any government help to get those new panels, because nobody wants to, when the government, as far as I know, doesn't have any plans for incentivizing people to upgrade their panels.
Well, it's a good question. I mean, for sure, part of those Inflation Reduction Act incentives I mentioned to you are available for solar panel installation. I will admit, I don't know exactly how that works when you have an existing installation that you're adding on to, but I guess I'm not 100% clear on that, but I do think it's possible that if you're adding new panels that you could take advantage of some of those tax credits as well. So I'm happy to look into that and try to get a more definitive answer, because I don't know that for sure how that works when you already have an existing installation.
Yeah, it'll be great when their battery technology gets better, so that we can have batteries in homes too, for the smooth out the generation.
For sure. Well, again, that's, in a way, even though it's been a challenge for you on the solar side, you just mentioning that solar panels are 3 times as efficient as they used to be, of course, is a great sign of progress. And we are certainly seeing similar things on the battery side. So, even in the last 18 months, the price of kind of batteries has dropped literally by 50%, and there's massive technological innovations coming. So that future that you're hoping for is really not that far away, where we actually get to the point where it feels cost effective, both, whether it be at the home scale or at the utility scale, to have batteries to help manage the storage. And I'll give you one kind of fun technological part of that solution that's relevant to my home. So again, I'm here in San Francisco. My gas oven broke, as my dad knows from watching me cook in various hackneyed ways over the last year and a half, broke a year and a half ago, and I couldn't bring myself to replace the igniter. So now when Dad and Kathleen come over for dinner, they see us cooking on a induction hot plate in a tabletop convection oven. But we're about to have a solution to that. So of course we wanted to replace it with an induction stove, but up until now, all induction stoves can't plug into a normal 110 outlet. They have to go into kind of a 220 outlet. But there's now a startup that is launched actually in Berkeley called Channing Copper, that has developed a stove that is now just coming onto the market, a stove and oven that is induction, but plugs into a normal 110 outlet. So that's great, because you don't need to run additional wiring anymore. It doesn't change your panel. You just can kind of take out your existing stove, plug it in, and it works. The additional benefit is the way that it works to be able to give it the power that it needs while only plugging into a 110 outlet for an induction stove, is that it has its own integrated battery into the stove itself. So that means that can give it the juice that it needs to. It also means it can kind of charge it at the perfect time for for utility, to kind of make sure you're smoothing out kind of the generation, which is great. And it means that if there's ever a power outage in our house, our stove will still work, and we can actually plug in our refrigerator or a cell phone charger or a laptop or whatever into our stove to run it for the next 3 days to be able to have it work. So, so again, don't want to get too focused on technology, because the reality is in most cases we already have the technology we need to be able to do a lot of this work. But there is so much new momentum and resources coming into these things that you're going to continue to see the next iterations of these things, where it is going to be oh, now I don't even have to hire a contractor to put a battery in my house. I can just replace my stove, which I needed to do anyways. There's already a battery. Like, I don't need a Tesla Powerwall. I've just got a battery in my stove. I'm set for what I need for the foreseeable future. You know, there's like these kinds of things that are going to just change the paradigm. But again, it only works because the price of batteries has dropped off enough. The improvement of other technologies is coming together where you can see new solutions that make it easier for folks to do the right thing. Steve.
Thank you.
Yeah, I keep thinking, you know, with global warming on top of everything else, and these natural disasters that keep coming up, I keep thinking to myself, well, maybe fear will get people off their butts to actually do stuff. And yet it's almost like the frog in the pot of water that's slowly heating. And I'm so fearful that it's just going to be too little too late. I have to be honest about that. I don't know how we go about kicking Republicans in the butt.
Yeah.
Pardon my French.
It's okay. No, I feel you on it for sure. So my personal take, I mean, I share your fear. I've devoted my entire career to climate. I was raised in a household to care about deeply from the environment, thanks to my dad and mom. So I share that. And I think, you know, anytime I like read the latest climate science, it's, you know, I'm depressed. I need to go like play soccer with my kids so I don't just start curling up in a ball and crying. So I feel all those things with you. I think what we see though is that it doesn't actually motivate folks. The reality is, like, it doesn't actually motivate folks in the long term, in the most part. Like, I wish that it did. I want things to be a certain way, and I wish that were the case. And I think what we see is that generally people hear that and they just can't comprehend it and they tune out and they're just like, I can't handle this. So like, we want that to be a motivating factor. And if it were, I would be happy to like play that card. But I think what we see is that it leads people to turn away from it and then to turn towards folks who tell them like, oh, it's going to be okay. Don't listen to those skyaholic folks. Like, listen to my other solutions that are actually not a part of it. But it's just like, that's usually, there's a risk of it really turning people away from it entirely. And I think honestly, it's the messages again of joy, abundance, improving your life in various ways that does drive people to action for the most part. And I think that is why we are structured the way they are. Again, like, I will admit, like, sometimes it's hard for me. Sometimes I do want to just like start off every speech by like shaking my computer and just being like, do you understand how terrible things are about to get? Like, we need to change things. I think the reality that we have to accept though is that maybe works for a certain subset of folks when we're kind of preaching to the choir, but it's not going to expand the universe of people whose minds we actually need to change to do this. But if we can make the case that it's like, you know, I think you probably want to do the right thing for the environment, but it might not be like at the top of your list. It might not even be the top 10 things on your list. But, you know, I know you'd like to do these things. I'm going to give you a version of that. So it feels like you're actually also improving the health of your family and you're reducing the chances of childhood asthma for your kids. You're also improving like the quality, you know, the comfort in your home. You're also making it easier to like clean up after you spill something on your stove. I think those kind of things are just like, oh, I'm like part of the future. You're making my life better. Oh, and great. I'm also doing the right thing for the environment. I think that is kind of the message that is going to change people's minds and lead to the market transformations, even if it is different than like the way that what would change my mind, I think is maybe different than what is going to change the mind of like the majority of the country who we need to change, who are not already kind of bought into the change that has to happen. So that's my personal take for what it's worth. Betsy.
I have a sort of a question, but it's also based in a statement of the current abundance that we do have. And I've heard two different versions of the amount in this thing, but I read first in Bill McKibben's newsletter that in the spring, for like 100 days, big California, ran totally on renewable sources. And several people have asked me, does that include nuclear? I looked that up. It doesn't include nuclear. Totally renewable sources. There was enough during the day and there was enough battery storage available to keep it going in the night. Now, the other version I heard is that it was like that when I looked for another source, like 5.8 hours a day. Well, that's still pretty terrific at this stage. And I don't know, are you familiar with that statistic or that event?
I'm not the second part of what you said, but in general, the principle of that, like, yeah, there's been so much kind of increased renewable generation in the state, again, primarily through the growth of solar and wind that has led to kind of, yes, this is a much more common occurrence now. I didn't know kind of the particular 100 days, but love Bill McKibben's newsletter in general. But yes, I mean, I think it is certainly true that this has become a much more common thing, and not just in California. I mean, we're seeing versions of this in Europe as well. And I will just say Texas, a place that nobody's going to associate with kind of like blue state Democratic policies, has had like exponential growth in renewable generation and is now having kind of, times throughout kind of, an incredibly hot summer there where it's renewables that are carrying all of the weight on these things. It's what has helped prevent blackouts in Texas. It's had actually the price of electricity go negative on the wholesale market kind of at summer peaks because of how much renewable energy is generating it. And so, I mean, I think that is a statement. I think really that is a source of hope because nobody's doing that in Texas at the state government level to like virtue signal or because they're doing it for the right thing for the climate. It's because it is the most cost-effective solution and it is helping reduce the overall costs for the system. And so that is a thing. Like that is like if Texas is doing, and Texas is honestly doing it faster than California because they've actually made it easier to create new generation than California has with some of their kind of regulatory differences. And so Texas is beating us right now in a way that I'm happy to celebrate in lots of ways. And I think there's lessons for us there too. But it is also a sign that like, you don't have to like harp on like the climate impacts of these things to actually motivate these changes. Like we have the technology and the ways to do that are going to be driven by money. So let's lean into that and take advantage of that too, to change all the folks who don't care about the climate.
So encouraging. Thank you.
Any last questions or thoughts?
So glad you could do this, Rahul. I think we will do everything we can to figure out ways to share this with a wider group of people. I think Stephen can help, Kathleen and I can probably help, you can help, and maybe George Williams, who was with us today from Hawaii and as our international president, can see that it's spread on the international level too. Because although you're working in the United States, I know this is happening all around the world. And so,
yes, totally. Well, and on that note, I'll just mention, as I'm sure you could tell from the video that I shared at the beginning of the presentation, Saul is Australian. And so so we actually have started Rewiring Australia and Rewiring New Zealand and are working on our own versions of this throughout the world. But again, it doesn't have to be our organization. There's so many different ways to get at this. So yeah, I would love for you to, I will, once I finish the recording, I will distribute that to y'all and would love for you to spread the word however you see fit. And again, sharing this recording is one thing, but people don't need to hear me speak necessarily. I think just hearing your experiences, if you get to try out using our tools, can pass that along to other, friends and family. That's how the word spreads around these things, just as much, if not more, than kind of speeches like this. So hearing it word of mouth from the people that, people trust in their communities is by far the most powerful way to make these things spread. And so that really comes to y'all, having experiences and sharing in them. So I do hope that you'll take a look at homes.rewiringamerica.org, play around with some of those resources and tools, let us know how it works. And then please do feel free to reach out anytime if you have additional questions or thoughts and follow up and let me know what I can do to support it. But really appreciate you all taking the time today and all the work that I know you're doing outside of this through IARF and the other organizations you're part of to make this important change happen throughout the world.
thank you.
Thank you.
Bless
Thank you. Thank you, everyone.